16 children were discovered in unimaginable conditions inside a small rural home in Vinton County, Ohio, in what veteran investigators described as one of the most disturbing child neglect cases they had ever encountered. Authorities said the children, who ranged in age from just 18 months to 18 years old, had been living in such severe neglect that Sheriff Ryan Kane remarked that most livestock were kept in better conditions. Hidden from public view for years, the children had gone largely unnoticed by the surrounding community, with neighbors telling investigators they had no idea so many children were living at the property. Among the victims was an 18-year-old who, despite being legally an adult, was described by prosecutors as developmentally functioning like a child. Investigators said she could not even spell her own name, underscoring the devastating impact of years of neglect and isolation. Several of the children were in such poor condition that they had to be airlifted to a Level 1 trauma center for emergency treatment. The children were discovered in the village of Hamden, a rural community in Vinton County, Ohio, about 75 miles south of Columbus, with fewer than 13,000 residents. Deputies from the Vinton County Sheriff's Office, assisted by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, entered the residence while executing a search warrant connected to an unrelated criminal investigation. Although authorities have not disclosed the nature of that original investigation, officers uncovered evidence of additional crimes after entering the home. Sheriff Kane confirmed that detectives continued processing the scene and interviewing witnesses, while assuring residents there was no ongoing threat to the community. He emphasized that the allegations were extremely serious and pledged that everyone responsible would be held accountable. He also thanked the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the Ohio Attorney General's Office, local fire departments, emergency medical services, neighboring sheriff's offices, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, the Division of Watercraft, and Ohio wildlife officers for assisting with the operation. Officials immediately prioritized the children's safety by arranging medical evaluations and securing appropriate placements where they could receive long-term care and support. Sheriff Kane also noted that the adults responsible for the home were not originally from Vinton County, and stressed that the crimes did not reflect the values of the local community. Ohio Attorney General Andy Wilson, who spent much of his career prosecuting crimes against children, described the scene as pure evil and one of the worst environments he had ever encountered. He praised the deputies and BCI agents who entered the residence and rescued the children, confirming that all 16 had been removed and transported to hospitals across Ohio while investigators continued collecting evidence. Authorities identified 4 adults living in the residence: Gary Siders Jr., Elizabeth Siders, Gary Siders Sr., and Christina Siders. The latter 2 were identified as the children's grandparents. All 4 were arrested and charged with 17 felony counts of child endangering, although investigators indicated that additional charges could follow as the investigation progressed. Inside the home, investigators described conditions they described as beyond filthy. Human waste and bacterial contamination were reportedly widespread, creating an overwhelming odor that officers said was almost unbearable. Sheriff Kane stated that the children appeared to have spent most of the previous 4 years confined to a single 12 by 12-foot room that served as their primary living space. Human feces covered much of the room and surrounding areas, leading investigators to describe the children's living conditions as absolute squalor. The emotional impact on investigators was profound. While they felt relief knowing 16 children had finally been rescued, they admitted the horrific conditions they witnessed would remain with them for a long time. Attorney General Wilson recalled that there was almost no indication from outside the property that children even lived there. Neighbors confirmed they had never seen the children, despite the family having occupied the home for approximately 4 years. Wilson also said the smell inside the residence lingered with him long after leaving the scene, and the images reminded him of humanitarian advertisements depicting severely neglected children living in desperate conditions. As court proceedings began, investigators revealed that the Siders family had previously lived in Gallia, Jackson, and Pike counties, as well as Wisconsin, before settling in Vinton County. Authorities also uncovered Gary Siders Jr.'s prior legal history. In 2021, the Pike County Sheriff's Office announced plans to seek felony warrants, charging him with theft and receiving stolen materials after allegedly recovering stolen construction materials from his residence. Investigators were examining whether any connection existed between that history and the current investigation. Another alarming discovery was that the children appeared to have lived almost entirely outside normal society. Authorities found no school records and no known medical records for any of them, suggesting they had received little or no formal education or routine health care. Investigators continued working to determine the full extent and duration of their isolation. Legal experts emphasized that the case remained in its earliest stages. Although the 4 adults had already been charged, prosecutors believed the investigation would likely uncover additional evidence and possibly more criminal charges. Detectives still needed to complete interviews, analyze forensic evidence from the residents, and review the children's medical findings before the full scope of the alleged abuse could be established. Ohio Special Prosecutor and former Judge Mark Weaver, who has handled numerous criminal cases throughout southern Ohio, described the case as shocking even by his standards. He noted that while Vinton County lies in the economically challenged Appalachian region, poverty alone could not explain what investigators had discovered. Families with 16 children are highly unusual in the area, and no level of financial hardship could justify confining children to such inhumane conditions. He also explained that Vinton County's limited prosecutorial resources made assistance from the Ohio Attorney General's Office and the Bureau of Criminal Investigation essential for handling such a complex case. Weaver praised Attorney General Wilson's leadership and explained that the charges filed so far represented only the initial legal framework. Defense attorneys would likely request a bill of particulars requiring prosecutors to provide more detailed allegations because the initial indictments contained only the statutory language necessary to file the charges. The investigation also raised questions about the identities and relationships of the children. Investigators questioned whether Elizabeth Siders, believed to be 33 years old, could realistically be the biological mother of the oldest victim. Although the 18-year-old was legally an adult, prosecutors maintained that any abuse she suffered while she was still a minor remained fully prosecutable under Ohio law. According to Weaver, one of the most important phases of the investigation would involve interviewing each child after medical and psychological stabilization. Those interviews could help establish who committed specific acts of neglect and whether additional crimes occurred. Prosecutors might also seek cooperation from the least culpable adult by offering reduced punishment in exchange for testimony against the others. He acknowledged that severe malnutrition can impair memory, communication, and cognitive development, making some children's testimony more difficult. However, he emphasized that prosecutors would not have to rely solely on witness accounts because the physical condition of the residence itself provided powerful evidence. He referred to the legal principle that the thing speaks for itself, explaining that children found living in such extreme filth strongly supports allegations of criminal neglect by the adults responsible for their care. Attention also focused on Elizabeth Siders after reports emerged that she frequently visited a local baby pantry for diapers, infant formula, and other necessities. Volunteers reportedly remembered that she often appeared anxious and occasionally tried to obtain supplies more than once each week, while Gary Siders Jr. waited outside in a vehicle. Those observations led to speculation that she may herself have been living under coercion or abuse, although investigators had not reached any conclusions regarding that possibility. Weaver also noted that while Appalachia continues to struggle with poverty, families have access to public assistance programs, including SNAP benefits, welfare assistance, churches, food pantries, and charitable organizations. Therefore, the lack of available resources could not reasonably explain the children's condition. He added that opioid and methamphetamine addiction remain widespread throughout the region and often contribute to severe child neglect. Although no evidence had linked substance abuse to this case, some observers speculate it could become a factor as the investigation continued. Weaver further explained that children require sunlight, education, social interaction, and normal developmental experiences, making prolonged confinement another form of neglect. He emphasized that legal responsibility extends beyond biological parents to every competent adult living in the household who accepts responsibility for children, including grandparents and other caregivers. Each of the 4 defendants faced 17 felony counts of child endangering, with the possibility of additional charges and lengthy consecutive prison sentences if convicted. Authorities stressed that the investigation remained active, as detectives continued reviewing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and determining whether further criminal offenses had occurred. A judge set bond at $300,000 for each defendant, while the rescued children continued receiving medical treatment, protective care, and therapeutic support. Law enforcement pledged to pursue every available lead until the full truth was uncovered and every individual responsible was held accountable.